But I was also really excited to see my old friend Michael sing. And if you don't know, Michael's family was in Chicago for a long time, and we were in Chicago, and we became best of friends with the Singh family. In fact, we went on vacations together every year for about 7 years, right? And so I thought you might wonder what Michael looked like back then. And so I wanted to show you a picture of my family and the Singh family and the Arneson family who we used to travel with. Michael's the cute little guy in the middle. So on this particular vacation, we found this really neat park that had cliffs, and we were cliff jumping. And I also had a new camera that I was trying out. And so what would happen is the kids would jump off the cliff and turn around and pose, and I'd take pictures while they fell off the cliff into the water. And so Michael, I just had to show you the kung fu pose off the cliff that Michael... So my question is, does he still make that face? Absolutely. All right. No, it's fantastic to see you, Michael. They've meant so much to our family. His parents moved to San Antonio to be with us over the last 2 years, and they just left, and I think they came through here on their way to Ottawa. And I'm going to tell you about the last 2 years in a minute and why that in particular was really special for me, that they came at just the right time. So I've had a chance to meet some of you, not all of you. I want to just briefly introduce our family. We did serve in the ministry since 1991. We spent some time in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's where we met and got married. I'm a Golden Gopher. And then we moved to Chicago, actually soon after the Campbells had left Chicago. We arrived in 1994, and we spent 15 years in Chicago working around different ministries in the Chicago church. That's where we got involved working with teenagers and their families, which was fantastic. During that time, I went and pursued a master's degree at Lubbock Christian and got a master's degree in Bible and family ministry. And, after I finished that in 2010, we felt the Spirit's call to take us to Africa. The challenge was the Chicago church didn't have a relationship with Africa, and our kids were 12 and 14 years old. And but when the Spirit calls, the Spirit moves, and God sorted out all the details. Here's a picture of my daughters when they were 12 and 14 years old with a baby tiger, right when we moved over there. And we spent 4 years there. We had a wonderful experience. The reason we went was to help develop family ministry in our churches in Africa, because we had planted 82 churches around the African continent, but we had coming into second generation challenges. And so we went to help build family. So I had a chance to visit 11 different African countries and help to work with family ministry. And we also set up schools to train ministers called the Ministry Training Academy. And that was a lot of fun. I did get to go to Madagascar, which was really neat. We have a church of about 40 people there, and this is a picture I took of the ring-tailed lemurs. There are certain advantages to different places that you live, and you get kind of close-up experiences when you live in Africa. That we fed giraffe, we stood under giraffe. Giraffe are pretty amazing animals. I had to show you my favorite picture, though, of all time. I had a neat opportunity to be with a 7-month-old tiger cub. And this is us playing together. That was a lot of fun. So we enjoyed our time there immensely. We still miss our time there. We moved when my oldest daughter graduated from high school, Hannah. We needed to come back so she could go to college. So we came back and we landed in San Antonio because San Antonio is kind of the big brother, big sister to the African work. So it became a natural place for us to be and continue to fly back and forth and help develop the academies, help with the families. So that's what we did for the first number of years. This is a picture of us when we moved to Texas, in Austin, actually, one day, our family. I have two daughters, Hannah, who is now almost 23, and Madeline, who's 21. And it was hard to go to Texas. Are any of you from Texas? One kind of in the back. Okay, yes, we've talked. You know, Texas is different. And when I set my mind to go to Africa, I was like, okay, it's going to be really different. So I'm just going to accept and welcome this new culture. And that's what we did. We were ready for it. I got to Texas. I thought, I'm coming home to the United States. I did not prepare myself. So the first year, I felt myself getting really critical of Texans. Like, everything's big, and they have really, really strong accents, and they're so proud of being Texan. Like, there's Texas flags embedded in the bricks of the houses, you know, and the guns, I mean. So coming from South Africa, where guns are kind of a no-no because the crime's so bad, you just don't want to have guns because anyway, long story. My first devotional with the teens in San Antonio, I said, let's have a conversation about whether Christians should own guns. And they looked at me like I had lost my mind. Why would that be a discussion? So, you know, it took me a while. So about a year in, I thought, I got to get my head around being a Texan. I'm here. So I went and bought some boots. And you know, I found that they actually served a new purpose because I'm only 5'5", so, you know, it gave me a couple inches. So that was great. But it was so funny, the day I walked into church, I'm coming down, you know, in the aisle at church, and it's like it was a magnet of Texans. All of a sudden, I was just one of them. Dude, I love your boots. I mean, they were just so excited. But the thing that really helps you win over a Texan is when you learn how to do this. How you learn how to smoke a brisket. And, you know, it's a labor of love. I spent 14 hours up all night watching the temperature. This was for my daughter's graduation party. And if you haven't had a good smoked brisket, there's a part of your life missing. So, this is my family now. My daughter Hannah got married a year and a half ago to Tacho Coronado, or Anastasio Coronado. He's from Del Rio, Texas, right on the border of Mexico and Texas. And Hannah and Tacho, serve in the full-time ministry in San Antonio with the campus ministry. So they're loving it. They're having a great time. My youngest daughter, Madeline, who just turned 21, is finishing up at UTSA. She still hopes to be a doctor someday, so she's working kind of in a pre-med direction, and that is the family. So, how many of you went to Reach in 2016? Okay, I'll give you a little framework for where I'm going to go with this. I want to tell you about the last 2 years of my life. I went to Reach, and right after Reach, we had a conference in Ghana for the West Africans, similar to what we did in Reach. And I had been in the ministry for 25 years or so by that time. And I got back from Ghana in September 2016, and I fell apart. I had never struggled with depression, and I didn't know what was happening to me, but my life stopped. I got home, and my suitcase lay there, I think, for weeks. I couldn't unpack. I couldn't do my email. Didn't want to look at my phone. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone, and I didn't know what was happening. And so the church leader there, Mike Tolliver, who's a good friend of mine, he said, take some time off, catch your breath, find out what's going on, see a doctor. So I saw a doctor and another doctor and another doctor. I had a full 700 question analysis and found out all kinds of fun things about myself, and went to another psychiatrist and found out she diagnosed me with 3 things: general depressive disorder, general anxiety disorder, and something that my friends always knew but never bothered to tell me, ADHD. I'm not blaming my friends. I knew I was ADHD. So within a couple months of trying to figure out how to get control, find help, get on the right medication, this is what my bedside looked like. And it was a crazy journey. Now, what was interesting, and I'd said about the Sings, Tony and Melanie moved to San Antonio in September of 2016. And it just was a kiss from God that as I was going through one of the darkest times in my own spiritual life, I had my best friend there with me. And I apologized when he got there. I'm like, you came all the way here, and I'm sorry, I'm just a mess. And Tony, in typical Tony's fashion, say, that's exactly why I'm glad to be here. So my wife was amazing during this time. It was hard for her as she saw me. As she says, every medication has a side effect. And it was a rough 6 months. During that time, I did a lot of soul searching and started asking the question, why did I run out of gas? And why am I in this dark place? And what I realized for me was that I miss deep study. I need deeper study. So I got online and I started looking on a website, accreditation website, for a doctoral program that taught something to do with spiritual formation or spirituality or, in that world. I wanted to learn more about walking with God at a higher level. And so I discovered there's a school right in my backyard that has a PhD program in spirituality. So I go and visit, and what I found out being there is they offer 2 doctoral programs. The PhD, which said, well, you'll have to quit your job, and it's 5 years, full-time study. And I was like, 5 years, full-time, no job, okay. What's option B? Option B is, well, you can do it part-time and get a Doctor of Ministry degree, and you'll be done in 3 years, and you can keep your job. And so I started attending classes and thinking, okay, I'm going to start digging and exploring and figuring this out. And what became clear, and this is the school, it's called the Oblate School of Theology. What became clear for me is I needed to do the 5-year degree. So Beth and I talked back and forth for months, prayed. Is this the Spirit? Is this a calling? What do we do? How do we put food on the table? What's she going to do? Because she's been in the ministry. We've been in the ministry together for 26 years. And we decided to take a step of faith. And I resigned in December after 26 years of being in ministry. I am now a full-time student studying spirituality. And the first question that almost everyone asks me is, what in the world is spirituality? And so it's actually something we're very familiar with. We just don't call it spirituality. Spirituality is how you live your life as a result of your faith. Theology is what you believe. Your spirituality is how you live out what you believe. It's how you treat people. It's how you pray. It's how you engage in the world around you. It's how you treat your spouse. It's how you pursue Christ. It's everything in your life that is a result of your faith is your spirituality. So that's what I'm studying now. And I'm going to share a few things with you today that hopefully will encourage your spirituality and tell you a little bit about, I want to talk really about God and knowing God. Because what I have found more than anything else is, and it's funny, does it take a PhD student a year and a half, a full-time study to discover it's all about God? Maybe it does. But it really is all about God. What's so amazing is that we live in this incredible traditional history of 2,000 years of people that have walked with God. And some who, regardless of what was happening in their church, because the church is, the church does what it does, right? And throughout history, sometimes the church has been great, and sometimes the church has been off in left field, but there have always been these individuals that walk with God. And I've been so inspired to study their lives and to see what they've done and how they do it. And so let's talk today about what it means to know God, because we are so blessed to know God. There's my favorite word to describe God is this word, ineffable. Ineffable. What does that mean? Ineffable. It's beyond description. It's beyond your ability to comprehend. It Like if you were to imagine the most amazing, powerful, immanent, every transcendent aspect of God, he's more than that. And that's really the God that we serve, right? And I honestly think one of the great blessings now of studying every day and thinking about God every day is I just get more and more blown away what it really means to have a relationship with the Father and what it means to have a relationship with the Son, Jesus Christ, and what it means to have a relationship with the Spirit, and why God reveals himself to us like that, because we need him to be a father, and we need him to be a brother, and we need him to be a spirit. We need those things because what God is trying to tell us in that is he's everywhere. He's right here. He's right here. He's there. He's there. There's no place God isn't. And his love is greater than we can imagine. And so this passage, you remember when Jesus was asked, Jesus is raised as this Jewish boy. The prayer that he would have prayed growing up would have been Deuteronomy 6, the Shema, every morning, every night. And the teacher of the law in Matthew 22 says, what is the most important commandment? And Jesus doesn't hesitate, right? He knows the answer to this question. It is what? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And what's the response? You've answered correctly. Like Jesus knew. Jesus didn't really need to know that. He knew he answered correctly. But this is really what it's all about, right? That's what Jesus says. Everything comes from this command. Everything. So you may be, and Paul says, you can possess all these gifts, and you can speak in tongues, and you can sacrifice your life away, and you can do all these things, but if you have not love, you are nothing. And so our love for God is the measure of our faith. It's everything. And then how the outpouring of our love for God affects how we treat each other is the result of that love for God. And so when we think about why we do what we do, and why we are here this morning. How many of you have been a Christian for more than 20 years? More than 30 years? Okay, so what brings you back? Why do you keep coming? And our baby Christians I saw 3 baby Christians. You're still awake? It's great. Wherever we are in our faith, there's different things that drive us back to this place with God, and it changes as we get older. When we're young, what is it that drives us? We want salvation. We see the need to get our sins forgiven, and it drives us to be with God. But as we get older spiritually, that salvation in and of itself, it's still there, but we need more motivation. It's got to go deeper. We develop a sense of gratitude for this life that we have, this blessing, this calling that we get to live out. But what happens is there's these places that we get stuck spiritually. And that's really what I do think happened to me in 2016. I got stuck. Doing what I was doing wasn't working anymore. And I had to dig deeper. And you start questioning why you do what you do. And a lot of us, raise your hand if you've ever come to church just because it's right. You didn't feel like it, you didn't want to, you just came because it's the right thing to do. Okay, good. That's a motivation, and it's a good motivation. Sometimes we need to show up because it's the right thing to do, right? But you don't want to live there. Sometimes we come to church not even because it's right, but we go, if I don't show up, then brother so-and-so is going to be discouraged. Or sister so-and-so is going to start calling and harassing me. And so we come for others. Also, a fine motivation, but you can't live there. What does deeper look like? Deeper means we don't do it because it's right. We don't do it for others. We do it for God. We do it because we understand what has been done for us. And that our passion, our dream, our whole being's desire is for God to manifest himself in us to be love to others. And that's the motivation that keeps us driving, digging, and striving. So what do we do with this, and how do we do it? How do we love God? First of all, with our mind. How do we love God with our mind? And what's different with loving God with our mind and our heart and our soul? Let's talk about what those mean and what happens with them. What is it? Dianoia is the actual Greek word. Love the Lord with all your dianoia. It's your thought world. It is your understanding. It's what goes on in your head all the time. It's right now. I mean, if you're ADHD like me, you're listening to me and you're probably distracted by a text message and you're thinking about what you're going to eat for lunch, and you know your stomach is still didn't know it was daylight savings time. So your stomach is thinking, this is the time you usually feed me, and you're thinking about that, but it's our thought world, and our thought world's all over the place all the time. But if we're going to love God with our mind, we have to learn how to mind our thoughts. One of the things that gets talked a lot about today is mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is controlling what's going on in your thought worlds. Being deliberate about what you think about. Meditation is another big word today. What is meditation? Well, Eastern meditation is emptying yourself, getting rid of all those thoughts. But Christian meditation has another component. We do empty all the worldly thoughts, but we fill it with Christ, Scripture, the Holy Spirit. And that mindfulness, that Christian meditation, has to be an integral part of how we live our life all the time. We live in God's presence all the time. What does it mean when Paul says, pray continuously? You ever think about that? What does that mean? Pray continuously. That means I'm constantly emptying negative thoughts, and I'm constantly filling myself up with Christ. And that is an ongoing process in all of my waking moments that should always be taking place. The Bible addresses our thought world, and this is an interesting passage. In Colossians chapter 1, he says, once you were alienated from God, you were enemies. Where? In your minds, because of your evil behavior. You know what this scripture's saying? This scripture's saying when you sin, you become God's enemy, not because you're becoming God's enemy, but you become God's enemy in your minds. There's another passage that talks about this. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. So the idea here is that sin, it's not like sin is somehow offending our Creator. Sin is keeping us from having the right mind to understand our Creator. Sin hurts us. So God calls us out of sin for our own benefit. Our evil behavior alienates us from God, not really, but in our minds. Because God's love is bigger than our evil behavior. 1 John chapter 5, verse 20, we also know that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding so that we may know what is true and who is true. You know what's amazing about being a Christian? And for the youngest Christians that are sitting right here on the front row that now have the Holy Spirit residing in them, they have a wisdom that the world doesn't understand. They know more about staying married. They're not married. They know more about staying married than most people in the world do. Why? Because they get the spiritual aspect, what makes marriage work, love and forgiveness. That's what we have. We have this knowledge. So how do we grow in this? You know, one of the things that older Christians get tired of is the basics. One of the things our church tends to be good at is talking about the basics. And that's okay. We need to be great at the basics. I read a book called The Game Makers about NFL football, it's probably been 20 years ago. And they interviewed some of the best coaches in the history of the NFL. And I will never forget, one of the coaches says, you don't win Super Bowls with fancy plays. Flea flickers don't win championships. Passing, catching, and tackling win Super Bowls. You have to master the basics if you want to be a world-class team. Well, what is the basics? Well, for us, the basics are what? I need to know how to walk with God every day. I need to love people every day. I need to learn how to share my faith. That's the basics. I need to learn how to deal with sin. And so we need to be reminded of those things, but Christians, come on. We got to move on to solid food if we've been around for a while, and we shouldn't need reminding of those things. We should be doing them all the time. Those are the basics. So what does it then mean to expand the playbook? Do you remember when Jesus said this to the Pharisees? It's an interesting statement he's making. He's saying, okay, you have turned faith into some basic tenets that you practice, but you're missing the deeper things. And he says, woe to you teachers of the law and hypocrites. You give a tenth, so that you give to church, your tithe, your contribution, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Now he's saying, look, don't give up the first things. You need to do the basics, but you need to move deeper. Do you stand for justice? We don't talk enough about justice in our fellowship. Justice is Jesus' ministry. You read the Gospels, he was looking out for and constantly trying to bring freedom for those who were oppressed. That is part of our faith. You've neglected mercy, you've neglected faithfulness. These are deeper things that we're called to do. We need to love God with all of our heart. What does that mean? How's that different? Our heart is called our cardia. That's where cardiology comes from, right? And so when we love God with our cardia, our heart, there's a lot of aspects that the Bible talks about that is our heart. So think about Matthew. Wow, I can't read from there. Okay, here. You can help me finish these. These people honor me with their lips, but they are what? Far from me. So in other words, we can go through the motions and not have our hearts engaged. So heart's emotion. Heart is the affective aspect of our relationship with God. Luke chapter 12 says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And when someone's heart is somewhere, or you know where their treasure is, you see it. It just pours out of them, right? Oh yeah, I can tell you really care about fill in the blank, right? You really care about fill in the blank. You can see it because it just comes out everywhere. So motivation is a heart issue. Matthew 18 says, forgive your brother or sister from the heart. Forgiveness comes from our hearts. So if we're going to love God with all of our heart, that means that we forgive everybody all the time. Now that one gets us stuck. Especially if you've been in church with each other for a few years. And we start developing this attitude like, what is wrong with this church? What's wrong with that sister? What's wrong with that brother? They're human, sinful people. The church is a collection of the broken. Always will be. Right? So if you come to church to try to find perfection, you're in the wrong place. And if you find a church that looks like they're perfect, they're hypocrites. Let's at least wear it on our sleeves and be real. We know we're broken. So stop pretending that we're not, right? Okay, so forgiveness, righteousness, we talked about it. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. You have a hard time connecting with God, you always have to check, am I being pure? Am I being righteous? Is there sin I'm not dealing with? Because if I purify myself, if I am righteous and do what's right, then I have a lot better opportunity to see my God. And, I love this. Jesus asked the disciples, are your hearts hardened? Well, what's the implication? We have a choice about how receptive we are in our hearts. Then, it's interesting how we do this all the time, every day, in every conversation. So when you walk up to somebody new that you've never met before, within the first 10 seconds, you make a decision of how open you're going to let your heart be to them. And then when you see someone you walk in that you are near and dear to, like Michael Singh, for me, right? I mean, when I walked and saw Michael today, I was like, my heart's wide open. I love this man. I haven't seen him for a long time. I'm just thrilled to connect, right? But then you walk in and you turn the corner and you see the brother who wronged you last week. And what's going on with your heart? I'm not letting myself get hurt by him again. So we make these decisions with our hearts all the time. We learn to do so. Kids don't know how to do it, do they? I mean, kids can't hide it. What you see is what you get with kids. That's a blessing and sometimes challenging. But that's why Jesus says we need to be more childlike as well. So with emotion, we're talking about loving God with all of our emotions, our heart, our what's good and what's bad. I mean, do we just come as is with all of our emotions? Some of us are really emotional. I am an extremely emotional person. And so sometimes I'm really angry, and sometimes I get critical, and sometimes I'm frustrated, and sometimes So does Jesus want me to come as is, or is he angry or upset or frustrated about different emotions that I have? You know there's only 2 emotions that he addresses in the Gospels? 2. Anxiety and fear. Do not be anxious about anything. Jesus talks about anxiety. And don't these tie together, anxiety and fear? Anxiety is this, I'm not sure it's going to work out the way I want to. Now, I'm not talking about the type of anxiety that's mental health anxiety, where we feel anxiety and need to be on medication. That's different, right? This is spiritual anxiety. And it ties into fear. Do not be afraid. Well, what do we get afraid of? If Christians make life decisions based on faith and not by the world, we're constantly making decisions that don't make sense to those around us. And we fear that. We fear what they'll think. We fear the implications. We fear what it'll do to the bank account. We've moved 15 times in faith. And yes, it hurts the bank account. And yes, it means starting over in relationships. But when you make faith decisions, it takes a lot of work to overcome your fear. Let's talk about loving God with our soul. So what is soul? If we've talked about heart and emotion, and it seems very, heart's that accessible, immediate, you feel it right at the top of your being, it's always right there kind of thing. Soul is the deeper place. Soul is something that exists in the very core of our being. It's called, in the Greek, it's called psyche. You ever heard of that? Psyche? Where do we get psychology? It's dealing with your deep down, most inner place. Now, I'm not saying that modern psychology is always addressing your soul, but that is where that comes from. It's also called nephesh in the Hebrew. And so we think about our soul. We learn certain things about soul from the scriptures. Like Matthew 10, Jesus says, do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. So our early brothers and sisters, especially in the 3rd century, 4th century, they lived this passage every day as they were being hunted down by the Roman authorities and killed if they claimed to be Christian. And throughout church history, we've had thousands of martyrs. Up until recent times, and even including recent times in some countries right now, if you are Christian, it may cost you your life. And so when Jesus is saying this, do not fear those who can kill the body but can't kill the soul, this is a very real, practical, direct thing. So there's something we know about soul that is more important than body, and that is our soul is eternal. Now, is our body eternal? This is always an interesting question, right, for church. Is our body eternal? Of course it is. Do you believe in the resurrection? The body can be killed, but the body will be resurrected. Now you go, well, wait a minute, I wanted a new body. I get you. I mean, look at this nose. I'm 5'5". I'm hoping to get a couple more inches in the new body. But what's interesting, just something to chew on, think about. When Jesus resurrected, first resurrected body, when Jesus resurrected, did they recognize him? Was he the same man? Now, he had the scars on his hands and his feet, but the disciples saw him and they knew him. So, just something to think about. We will be resurrected. Amen? I'd probably discourage like half you in the room today, like, wait a minute, man, I was not signed up for taking the same body into the afterlife. All right, so eternal, our soul's eternal, our soul is our inner life. Jesus talks about this is right before he dies on the cross, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. He's saying, I am sorrowful in my depth of my being, right? I mean, I'm not upset that they didn't have my flavor of soda at the shop. I'm deeply sorrowful. And our appetites come from our soul. This is where, in Psalm 42, as a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you. What is he saying? That our soul is our appetite. He uses this metaphor of a deer needing water, and that's the way we should feel. Like we need to be fed. Our soul needs feeding, spiritual feeding. So the question is, how do you feed your soul? That's a real question. How do you feed your soul? We're all different with this, right? Some of us feed our soul through nature. How many of you are like that? You go outside, you're in nature, and you feel the depth of your soul being filled. I understand that. Some of us fill our soul with study. That's me. That's why I needed to go back to school. I needed to go back to fill my soul. Some of us fill it with ritual. Now, may not be as commonly evident in our fellowship, but there's a lot of churches that are liturgical churches where there's rituals that are repeated every week, and there's so many people that love that and feel that feeds them and feeds their soul. How about asceticism? Probably don't know what that is. Well, asceticism is the idea of cutting things out of your life to be closer to God. Fasting, solitude, finding your way through asceticism. Caregiving, this is my wife. When my wife sits down with a teenage girl to help her in her life, she gets her soul fed. Contemplation, activism, like standing up for those in need. Social justice, some of us feel we're built that way. Sensation, feeling, touching, engaging. There's a great book, if you want to read more about this, by Gary Thomas called Sacred Pathways. It's a brilliant, brilliant book that I would encourage you. Now, for me, coffee feeds my soul. I have a coffee problem. About 20 years ago, I got tired of the coffee at the coffee shops because it was never good enough. And so I started roasting my own coffee. First in air poppers, and then I moved on to a proper coffee roasting machine. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. I order coffee from all over the world, and I roast it every week at home. Then I let it sit for 2 days, and then I cold brew it I spend some time. It's worth it. But there's a lot of reasons I drink coffee. First of all, it tastes like hopes and dreams. So that's my first reason. It tastes like hopes and dreams. Secondly, other people talk to me in the morning, so I need to drink coffee. Third, it's difficult to study with closed eyes. And lastly, it helps me mimic socially acceptable behavior. So I've had my coffee today. I'm in good shape. So that's for me one thing. There's a lot of things for me. This is one thing for me. I love riding my mountain bike. Puts me out in nature. I get a chance to just be in God's creation and ride and sweat and listen to music. This is my sanctuary. This is my African vinyl room where I have pictures that I took from around Africa, and I have a leather chair that sits in there, and I have records. I've been collecting records for years, and every morning I put a jazz record on, and I read my Bible every day. Love it. And this is the other thing that feeds my soul. Food and family. That's 5 pounds of crawfish on the right. I ate every last ounce. And this is me and my daughter eating sushi together. feeds my soul. And then, of course, I've already shared, this is my favorite place right now. This is my study. This is where I sit and read and study God and His Word. So today, really, what am I trying to inspire, hope, encourage you to think about is I just really want you to find the way, the path, the journey that helps you love God with everything in your being. Because regardless of what happens up here in the sermon and the songs, and if you liked them or you didn't, or a brother looked at you sideways, it doesn't matter, because if you're loving God the way you need to love God, you'll be just fine. Thank you so much for letting us be here.